Hey everyone, how you doing? We are in, I guess, what you would call my home lake. Let me say it this way. Going that way, if I could walk to this, it would take about 5 minutes. However, I gotta drive not just around the lake, but around to get to the other side of the lake, and it's about 10 minutes to drive. So, there is a boat ramp to a different pond and river closer than this. But I really like this place. It's always peaceful. We're facing a beach right now. Even when the beach is covered in people and the arcade going, it's still pretty quiet over here. So something I like. Today, we get to fulfill the purpose of this whole channel in the first place. It's been a little while since we've spoken about history. And today is almost a perfect day for it. I say almost because I was planning on doing this yesterday. The date is important. But it was really not weather to go on any kind of water. Extremely windy. It was cold and cloudy. Some of those conditions are pretty good for fishing. But you throw that extreme wind, it's not good for the kayak and casting. So I didn't go out. So today we'll start talking about it. If you guys didn't know what I was talking about, in 1775 on April 19th is when the battles of Lexington and Concord took place, and ultimately it led to the beginning of the siege of Boston. So now we know that's coming up. Let's backtrack a little bit and see what's happening and see why these things took place. We'll start back in March 5th, 1770, to when the Boston, I don't know if you can see my fingers, massacre took place. A couple civilians killed there by British soldiers. There was even a trial afterwards. The lawyer for the British soldiers was John Adams, and you really got to respect the quote that came out of it, when he was almost ostracized for it. And his answer was, "I will take law and order over mob rule any day." That wasn't a quote, obviously, but it's pretty much exactly what he said. All of the British soldiers except 2 were found not guilty. The 2 British soldiers that did do the firing that landed, they were found of manslaughter and court-martialed. Unfortunately, I don't know the results of what happened from that. So it was, tensions were rising long before the Boston Massacre had taken place. And which is why it actually took place. The citizens of Boston, who were getting fed up with all these extra acts and extra, basically all their money being taken, and they egged on the soldiers to basically try to fire on them because they really wanted to have something start, and they didn't want to fire the first shots. Something that still stands true in the American military today. But that's not important. So that took place. Paul Revere actually made his name out of that. When you see the etching of the soldiers firing on unarmed citizens, that was Paul Revere's work. Although I'm not certain, it sounds like he may not have been the one to do the original drawing and took credit for it. But it was a complete fabrication. It's like everything it portrayed really didn't happen. So, excuse me. Hey, we're back. Apparently, battery died to the GoPro, and I do have a backup, unfortunately. So we left off with where Paul Revere had made the etching, and now the things are starting to settle down a little bit, but the colonists are still not happy. So now we're gonna jump forward a couple years to the next big event, and that would have been the Boston Tea Party. Oddly enough, the actual place that the Boston Tea Party took place is not accessible because that water has been filled in. Boston in 1770s was much smaller than it is now, even though if you've ever been there, it's a very small city as it is. It'll take you 20 minutes to walk across the whole thing, but it'll take an hour to drive across it. So the Boston Tea Party, big ringleader there would have been Sam Adams. He set up with the Sons of Liberty, and they wanted to do something to basically prove a point. And when I say prove a point, it would have been cheaper to purchase the tea the way the British were trying to sell it. The whole ordeal worked out with the West Indies on how the tea gets there and how the prices would have been. So they were just trying to get rid of it at a much cheaper price than what was being paid now. But the colonists wanted to prove a point. They didn't want it to destroy any personal property. The tea was owned by the king, and they were actually trying to take a shot at the king. So the ship, which was a private ship, was, I wouldn't say completely unharmed. They did break a lock, but Sam Adams actually replaced it with a new one. And they went aboard, they found all the tea, and they took it up to the top and destroyed the crates and threw it all in the water. You know, I'd like to say the water's that color now, which is very similar to the water color here, is from the tea, but I know that's not true. All right, so the Boston Tea Party takes place, and there's a complete occupation of British soldiers in Boston now. It's their city. They're there to actually control these rebellion, or actually not even rebellion yet, these unruly colonists, as King George III wanted to say. So we're gonna jump now to General Gage. General Gage has actually been in charge. He's a commander-in-chief for the British soldiers in America, which basically meant Boston, because that was the only city being occupied. But General Gage had heard plans of, or not plans, but rumors of stockpiles of cannon, powder, and muskets in Concord. So he dispatched a battalion of soldiers to go to Concord from Boston, destroy it, and then come back. Now, this was already a rough day for the British soldiers. This is, important to know, because they had their normal day and they had no idea what was about to come. When nighttime comes and it's about to, hit the rack and head in, so little do they know, surprise, surprise, you're about to go on a 19-mile march and do this. And then when you're done with your 19-mile march, you're gonna head right back. And who knows what the plans were for that, because that didn't happen, obviously. The Sons of Liberty, headed by Sam Adams, John Hancock, and Dr. Joseph Warren, they had what was called mechanics. So basically they had their own network of spies and information gathering through trusted people, and they called them the mechanics. The mechanics had advised them that the British are setting up to come to Concord. Really, the only question at that point that was not known of what was going to be happening was, are they coming by sea or land? And this is where you get the phrase of one if by land, two if by sea. May or may not be true, by the way. but whoever came up with it, I like it. And it turns out they were actually coming by sea. They had closed down Boston. Now, that's very easy to do because Boston itself had one small strip called Roxbury Neck, and that was the only way in and out of Boston at that time. So they could have taken that route, but they sealed it off and people couldn't get in or out. But that's not the route they took. They took by sea. So they actually went across the Charles River and right into Charleston to begin the trek. It didn't take too long. It did take several hours because we are talking, a couple hundred troops here, to get them across and then start marching. Things are going, and they're just marching along. And when they come up to Lexington's Green, basically the center of Lexington, they're confronted by militiamen. Not many, it's about 80, I believe. I gotta look that up, I don't remember. So I believe there was about 80 of them, and they were there to stand their ground. After so long of going back and forth and not actually knowing, not letting the British go back through or go through, somebody fired a shot. Question is who? The problem is now there's no way to know otherwise. That question will always remain. How nice. Just threw my rattle trap in that tree over there. Didn't think it was gonna go that far. I gotta go over there. Gotta reel myself in. This is why I have 20-pound fluoro in here. So the shot was fired. It doesn't matter who. But when all was said and done, there were 4 fatalities on the colonist side, and none on the British. The British made their point. People, they all scattered at this point. Is clearly not ready for, what they got themselves into. So I'm gonna go right into the side here. The British move on. That's no longer, stopping them from completing their mission. There we go. I'm gonna have to cut my line and lose this. So when they marched on, they went right into Concord, and they knew where the stores were, right on the other side of the North Bridge, which even to this day is not really that inhabited. But on the way, they had burned a few stockpiles that they had found, just minimal things here and there. Yeah, I cut this line. Now I don't want to do that. They found those and they burned them, which was, what they were supposed to do. Not necessarily the place they were supposed to do that, but that was their mission. That was not a good move. And I don't mean because, they, destroyed the munitions. I mean, the militiamen that were already around in town, waiting on the other side of the North Bridge, thought that they were burning down the town in several houses on the way through. They had made their way through town and made it to the North Bridge, and that's exactly where the colonists were waiting. There was a firefight. This one was definitely much more interesting and much better for the colonists than it was the British. There were casualties on both sides, but minimal, really minimal on both. But the problem is what happened afterwards. When the battle at Concord had actually taken place, there were militia units still on their way from all the surrounding communities. They're getting the call overnight and not sure exactly, it's going to take them several hours to get there. Well, they're on their way. Oops, slow that down. They're on their way, and what they were doing is chasing the British back down the whole Battle Road, which is that 19-mile trek from Concord all the way back into Boston. But then so many were intercepting them on the way too. If you ever get a chance to go to the Battle Road and explore it a little bit, you'll run into a place called Bloody Bend. And that's, you know, a triangle. It's basically 3 points coming in out to one. And one of them was British soldiers. The other two were different militias. And 8 soldiers died right then and there in a matter of moments, as they were just trying to escape, because they had absolutely zero chance to, you know, defend themselves where they were. And that actually took place all the way to Boston. After that is when the siege was placed on Boston. Now, automatically you would think, oh, it's Boston and it's siege. Like, you know, well, who sieged it? It had to be the British. No, it was the colonists. We're actually containing the British to, you know, particular spots and not letting them actually, you know, forage outside of Boston. So the siege of Boston had actually lasted for 6 to 8 months, and around this time, George Washington, already at the Second Continental Congress, is being made general of the army. That actually didn't even exist at that point. It was all militia units in Boston. But then right after that, before Washington could actually make it into town, the Battle of Bunker Hill had taken place. It is the Battle of Bunker Hill, but it's actually, it took place on Breed's Hill. So good to know that fact. It's always going to be known as Bunker Hill, but it's Breed's Hill. Bunker Hill is there. It's part of that same spot. It's just not where it actually took place. So the Battle of Bunker Hill was the first pitched battle. Gage is in the harbor looking for a way to do an amphibious landing of soldiers while bombarding from the ships in the harbor. And the colonists under both Dr. Warren, so Dr. Warren, who's actually general too, was with General Putnam, and they had actually set up fortifications in 2 separate points to prepare for the British to land. Everybody knew it was going to happen. Really, the only question was when. It was supposed to be General Warren's command, but he suggested to, you know, General Putnam that he actually take the command, considering General Putnam has actual military experience, while Dr. Warren never did. General Putnam was in the French and Indian War. So the battle finally takes place. It's a big landing, and it was 3 different waves. The first wave came in, and the colonists were able to fight them off. The British soldiers were just dropping like flies. And so they drew them back the first time and the second time, but on the third time they weren't able to draw them back again because they had actually run out of ammunition. Actually, more powder. They had the ammunition, just not the powder. So they couldn't draw them back a third time, and they were pretty certain that third time would have done it, and I believe it myself personally. So the British actually took the hill. A very deer-bought victory, as Henry Clinton likes to say. However, General Greene wants to sell them another hill at the same price. The fatalities on the British side were just astronomical. Both sides were hurt pretty bad, but the British were definitely much worse. And all for the hill. So it was in Charlestown, not actually Boston. So it's overlooking Boston from the north side. If you like sports, the TD Garden Center is like right across the water from it. So they gathered the hill. The siege remained, and Washington arrived. So does General Greene. They roughly about the same time for them. They arrive, and the first thing that General Washington does is he sends Colonel Knox, Henry Knox, away. Henry Knox, a bookseller from Boston, and he was part of the artillery unit in the militia already. But Washington charged him with going to Fort Ticonderoga in upstate New York. It's right where Lake George and Lake Champlain meet. Very, very pretty area. And that area actually plays a big role throughout, first couple years of the Revolution. So he sends them there. Now, Fort Ticonderoga was already captured from British soldiers by Benedict Arnold and Ethan Allen in 1775. We're in 1776 now, by the way. So in 1775, they captured it, and Washington wanted Knox to get all the cannon and artillery and powder that he could. And Fort Ticonderoga was very, very stocked. This actually made an artillery unit out of nothing. And Henry Knox, he went there and he grabbed it. He got there. It's in the middle of the winter at this point. He gets there, and on the way back is when the winter really hits. He has to wait a little bit because of just backlashed. He wanted the lakes to freeze over so he could have a way to transport the cannon back. He just had oxen, men, and some carts, and not really anything to do it properly. So he gets there and he makes the trek. They lose one cannon in the whole thing, and nothing else. Amazing. So he gets back and he meets Washington, who is at Dorchester Heights. Dorchester Heights is in South Boston, so it is Boston, but it's the high point of the whole area. It overlooks the whole harbor and all of Boston. So when Knox arrives, Washington gets Knox and all his men to set up fortifications and set up the artillery. There was 19 pieces at this point. And they all do it overnight. This is a feat, an engineering feat. Because even General Howe, who had actually taken over for General Gage as commander-in-chief, had said Washington had made his men do more in one night than I can make my men do in 3 months. Quite a compliment, from an opposing general. A deserved one, because it really was a good feat. And so Hal wakes up one morning, because that's when he says this. When he wakes up in the morning, he says this because he's completely surprised of, whoa, where did that come from? Holy crap, we're screwed. We can't stay here. So while the British had already had Boston, were occupying Boston, they got up and left. They really didn't have much choice, because like I said, there's no way they could have defended against that. They did try to fire upon Dorchester Heights a few times. Ooh, there's a big log under me. Probably scaring every single fish I should be catching there. Man, that's a good one. I've got to remember that's there. But he was unsuccessful because the heights were too high, and it was actually fortified pretty well. So if they did hit something, they could have withstood couple hits easily. But they decided to leave, which was really the best point they could have done. Nobody is really sure what they did or where they went. Turns out they actually went to Halifax in Canada. So even though almost all of Canada was, French controlled, some of it was British controlled, and Halifax was, a British territory there. So that sat dormant for about a year. Washington, playing guessing games, not sure what was going on, finally decided that his best bet is New York. Get to New York and see what he can do from there. But he was absolutely correct in what he was thinking. New York was the place they went to. So while in Halifax, Howe was just waiting his reinforcements, and the reinforcements that were to come were unprecedented, to say the least. The largest amphibious landing in the United States history of 34,000 troops and over 400 ships came over. The king wanted to squash this rebellion that had actually turned into a war at this point. Quick, he had had enough. We'll stop there because I just wanted to talk about Boston. I gotta separate some of these and do the other half of the whole revolution for you at some point too. It's coming, but that's enough for the revolution. Let's talk about fishing a little bit. I had broke my Mach Pro rod the other day, so I replaced it with a Guggen Gold reaction rod. Absolutely love that rod. But I'm not throwing that anymore after I had to cut my line from losing my rattle trap in a tree. A good rod will help you cast a lot further than even you thought. That's the second rattle trap this year too. Oh man. So I'm not throwing that one. I'm throwing my Shimano DC, SLX DC, on my Lew's TP1X multi-purpose rod. So that might change a little bit. The Shimano might go onto the Guggen, and I'll put the Lew's with the Lew's. My two main go-to rods right there. I am throwing a Mega Bass Mag Draft. This is the first time I'm actually throwing this. When I bought it recently, I assumed they were much more expensive, but when I saw them, they were very reasonably priced. So you can see it looks like a rainbow trout, and it's very, very realistic. It's like a soft plastic. But I like the hooks here. I don't know if you can see that. I can have one hook holding in like that for double, or two at the sides right here, keeping the one, and that's if I'm in grass, which I was earlier, but I'm not now. Anyway, let's get back to throwing this. I am gonna retie here soon on this. I'm throwing with 50-pound braid, so if this huge, really great swim bait does its job, I can catch it and be fine. However, it's very camouflage, so it's stuck in there. It goes. But I want to throw another swim bait over the winter time with several mystery tackle boxes. I got a couple junior contenders from Googie, and I haven't thrown one yet, and I'm really excited about it. I know this isn't the right time to throw them either, though. We're not quite pre-spawn yet. Soon though. The water